Okay, this is another video, and I want to call it How to Read Cards, or Learning How to Read Cards using this suit of swords. And I've got the ace suit of the 10 here, and we'll take a look at them in a few minutes. But in the beginning, I'm Scottish, and I grew up in Scotland. And when I would go into Glasgow, I would often go by bus. And if you go in Scotland at the time, you knew there was a bus stop because there was a pole, a metal pole, maybe 7 feet high, and it was attached into the sidewalk, and it was painted black and white, and there was a big sign at the top that said bus stop. So you knew where you were, and you knew that if you stood there, the bus would stop at that particular place. And so once, years ago, I happened to be in Vancouver, and I was going into the downtown area, and somebody said, go up to West 10th and take a bus, take the 4th bus. And I went to West 10th, and I looked, but I didn't know where, I couldn't find a bus stop because I was looking for what I was used to. And it turned out that the bus stop, the little sign, it was a metal plate about this size, and it was nailed to a wooden hydro pole about 10 feet off the ground, and I couldn't see it. And so, being told to wait to take a bus, I sort of understood what was going on, but it didn't really help me that much, even though I kind of understood. And I give you that example because I think it's a bit like this with tarot books that give you the meanings of cards. So you can look, the Three of Swords means this. And the problem is, or I think the problem is, that learning somebody else's meanings, or learning the connections that somebody else has made with the symbolism of the card, for instance, whatever this 7 of Swords would mean, or the 5, learning somebody else's connections will only take you so far, and it can often happen that you don't know how to use the keywords or the ideas that the person has given you in the book. So I think that if you're learning how to figure out what cards mean, it's better to make your own connections, right? So that the Ace of Swords represents something that makes sense to you. But at the same time, the symbolism that you relate, let me put on another light. The symbolism that you use should be not just personal, or not too personal, because you're better with symbolism that everybody can understand. So I could say the Two of Swords represents dancing, right? Why? It's not that obvious. But the thing is, if you know anything about Scottish culture, you know about Scottish country dancing and Highland dancing, where the dancer would take one sword this way and one sword this way, and these are sharp swords, and in bare feet they would dance back and forth, up and down and across. And so two swords, you can sort of stretch the meaning and imagine that these swords are crossed. So if I look on this Two of Swords and say it represents dancing, really it doesn't. I mean, I may have a personal understanding of it that way, but it's not the kind of thing that anybody else can relate to. So I'm saying dancing, but that's kind of too much of a stretch. However, there's a book, it's actually a 2-volume set, and it's called The Celestial Ship of the North, and it's by a woman called Valentia Strayton, and she talks about mythology and symbolism throughout the whole book. And she says in that book that the sword is and always has been. The book was written like 1920. So the sword has always symbolized justice and not sacrifice. Okay, so I'm going to put a link on screen so you can go to the site and download some sample pages. And if you like the look of the material, you can buy a copy of the book. It's $4.99. So the thing is, with these two books, there's something in every page that relates to the tarot, and I'll give you some more later. But if we stick with the sword representing justice, I want to look and see how we can use this basic idea to help with our understanding of the whole suit of swords. Because you can take the idea of justice, of the sword as justice, and work with it and expand on it and use it as a general rule. And the thing is, if you take this universal symbolism, it's going to make sense to somebody who lives in the middle of New York City, as well as people who live in a small village in northern Italy, or whatever, a very different kind of atmosphere and background in these two different places. But the thing is the truth, no matter where you are. So the statement that I read was that the sword is a symbol of justice and not sacrifice. And so we're told, or we can take that to mean that we're not supposed to pick on other people and get them to suffer so that we don't have to. And that could be a general piece of understanding that we apply to every time that we see a sword in a card, or whenever we're referring to, or whenever we're presented with a suit of swords. Okay, so we take justice, or the sword, as justice. And so with the Ace of Swords, this can mean that when this card comes up, we have to do what is right, what is just. Okay? And it's as simple as that. With the Ace of Swords, you have to do what's right. And there's a movie called K-Pax, came out a few years ago with Kevin Spacey and Jeff Bridges. Jeff Bridges plays the psychiatrist, and Kevin Spacey plays this alien who travels on light beams to Earth and so on. And it sounds a little bit far-fetched, but it's a really good movie and it's worth watching. But there's one bit where Jeff Bridges is trying to figure out if Prout is nuts, if he's insane, and because Prout says he comes from another planet. Well, so Jeff Bridges says to him, "Are there lawyers on where you come from?" And Kevin Spacey says, "No, we don't have lawyers." And Jeff Bridges says, "In that case, how do you know the difference between right and wrong?" And Kevin Spacey's character says, "Every creature in the universe knows the difference between right and wrong. And we don't need lawyers to tell us this." And so with the Ace of Swords, it seems to me justice, the sword is justice. With this card, you have to do what's right. And everybody knows the difference between right and wrong. Everybody knows what's right and what's wrong. So you have to go with what is right. Okay, that's one way of looking at the ace, and one bit of information that you can get from it based on the meaning of the symbolism. Here's the two.